What a pleasure to be here. It's a special treat always to return to UB. And I'm also very happy that I've been the recipient of gracious Druze hospitality many times. And I'm going to remember this auspicious occasion of our 2 days together in the same spirit as these past episodes. In the summer of 2000, I had the wonderful experience to join the members of the American Druze Society in a trip to Soweto and Praia and some other places in Hauran. And so that day is a cherished memory for me, and I think that this day and tomorrow will join it in my happy memories. After that visit, or in the period before that visit in 2000, I spent the previous 2 years trying to learn everything I could about the Syrian revolt against France in 1925. And so I spent these 2 years in Damascus and in Hauran and Soweto and the villages of the Jalaloud. And it seemed to me at the time, at that time, and it seems to me now that the Druze seem to get credit or blame sometimes far out of proportion to their numbers for big events in history. And it seemed to me that both the blame and credit was something that the people involved themselves, which is to say, the community, rarely claimed for themselves. And I mean, especially along the lines of the so-called Druze revolt of 1925, which was only called the Druze revolt by its enemies in the French government. The people involved always called it the Syrian Patriotic Revolution, or the Great Syrian Revolt. So this issue of credit and blame was something that had been thinking about. And I think that there's other episodes that are similar in a way. I'm not talking about famous people like Casey Kasem or something like this, taking the credit for rock and roll. Of course, he didn't take the credit for rock and roll, but other people gave it to him. So, I've been interested for a few years in the years surrounding independence or evacuation in Syria and in Lebanon, but especially in Syria. And this is the period around the Second World War, the battles between de Gaulle and Churchill, Castrol and Spears, their deputies here in the region. The dawn of the Cold Wars, the coups in Syria, and the emergence, the entry of the United States with the CIA into this region. And so I was interested in this, and I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do anything new about it to add to the work of Yusuf Sharbati, or Yusuf Shaitani, and Joshua Landis and Patrick Steele. But last year, I had the good fortune to spend the entire year in the French archives in Nantes. And I went to the archives every day, almost, for 10 months. And I found that there were all kinds of things in those archives that people hadn't worked on before about this period immediately after and during the Second World War. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I discovered that there were new interpretations possible that I hadn't understood before. And it's also the case that for the French, it seems, never actually left. And their intelligence services and their diplomatic missions in Beirut and in Damascus continued to collect huge volumes of material in the period after independence. And this is what I had found last year. And it's also the case that the Obama administration declassified millions of pages of CIA documents about this region and other regions in the period after independence and after that time. Now, of course, it goes without saying, and everyone knows that the CIA was intimately involved in the affairs of this region from the moment of its inception. But I think it's important to say it again anyway. Those documents prove it. So these comments today are part of a small project, or a new project that I haven't talked about publicly before, and so I hope I can offer you something new. And so I also hope you'll be patient with me, because like I said, frankly. I want to, let's see, I wonder what happened to my picture there. I have a photograph of a young man I want to introduce you to. So I'm going to talk about the opposition to Shishakli, the Shishakli years, and the so-called Druze opposition to Shishakli. In 1949, March of 1949, after barely 3 years of independence, the year of serious coups was inaugurated. The first coup by Micheal. And during the course of that year, there were 3 coups, culminating with the coup of Adib Shishakli at the end of 1949. So 1949 was the year of coups. And Adib Shishakli was involved behind the scenes in the first coup of Micheal in Damascus, and the third coup at the end of the year. Now, Shishakli stayed in power first behind the scenes and then in the front of the government until 1954. And the conventional telling of this story is that he was forced to flee and was overthrown by a united Druze opposition. But some of the things that I found in the archive last year complicate the story a little bit, and so this is what I want to address. Now, of course, he was then assassinated in Brazil about 10 years later by the left of and the story I'm going to tell in a slightly different way has 2 main characters, Mansour Sultan al-Atrash and Adib Shishakli. Now, this is I was going to show you the photograph here. Of course, everybody recognizes. I'm sorry. Everyone recognizes the location here on campus. And the man on the left is Mansour Sultan al-Atrash. So I'm going to talk about him and his role, his singular role in the events of Shishakli's overthrow. In 1953 and 1954, he was 29 years old. He was a graduate of Adib in the Department of Political Science and the Sorbonne in law. He was a committed member of the Ba'ath Party in Syria, and he was a lecturer at Damascus University. It's a lovely picture. I didn't find it, but of course, also during the year 1953, he was jailed twice by Shishakli's government, and both times the reputation of his famous father helped to get him released from jail. I had the very good fortune to get to spend some hours with Mansour al-Atrash before he died in 2006. And at that time I was asking him about his father. And I knew then, he was in many ways one of the most impressive people I have ever met. And I knew then that I really should be asking him and talking with him about his life and the things that he had experienced. But I was focused on 1925, and so I lost that opportunity to talk with him about things that he remembered. Now, the other character of our story here is Shishakli, who, of course, was a Syrian army officer and was, like I say, behind the scenes of these first 3 coups, and then stayed in the background in the early 50s until he emerged ostensibly to stop civilian politicians from pursuing union with Iraq. One of the things that's in the archives is that Shishakli, from the perspective of the French government, was considered their agent, and to a lesser extent the United States. So this is really, I think, quite unusual to realize that the degree to which the French government believed that Shishakli was doing the work of France. And I'll say more about that in a little bit. Now, over the years that he was in power from 1949 to 1954, he stayed early 1954. He stayed behind the scenes and until he launched a coup to overthrow the government of Hashim al-Abbasi, the Homs politician. It's interesting because as Mansour al-Atrash was the son of Sultan al-Atrash, one of the great heroes of Syrian independence, Hashim al-Abbasi was another great hero of Syrian independence, and he too had a son who was politically active, a young man who also suffered quite significantly under this period of time, Adnan al-Abbasi. And if I have time, I'll say more about Now, as Shishakli intensified his rule and tightened his grip on power in Damascus, the French and the American embassies reacted with real enthusiasm. They were thrilled with his vigorous authoritarian orders in the period of the early 50s. And Syrians, especially politically engaged Syrians, which in 1952 was practically everybody who was reading a newspaper every day. I mean, the degree of intense political engagement is kind of incredible to see in the archives and in the press. Were ever more critical of what they came to call the dictatorship of Shishakli And in 1952, Shishakli inaugurated a single political party that he meant to control the government, and outlawed other political parties, exiled Micheal and the Salah Qatar and Akram Borani to Beirut, and he went after Mansour al-Atrash, but he was young, much younger than these other political figures. But because of the popularity of Sultan, he was less able to go after Mansour quite so vigorously. According to Patrick Seal, Shishakli proclaimed, "My enemies are like a serpent. The head is the Jabal Druze, the stomach Homs, and the tail Aleppo. If I crush the head, the serpent will die." But I think Seal misunderstood this, actually. And I think Shishakli was talking not about the community, the Druze community, but about Sultan and his son themselves and their political agitation. And I think when discussing Homs, he was talking about Hashim al-Atassi and Adnan al-Atassi, his son, specifically. Now, and they were, of course, his most formidable enemies among people who spoke in opposition to the dictatorship, in defense of a democratic government and a pluralistic society in Syria for all citizens. In May of 1953, Mansour and his brother Nasir, who was a medical student, and their friend Nayef Shahoua threw homemade explosives at Shishakli's house in Damascus. I don't know too much about this episode. It's not very well represented in the archives. I'm still on the trail. But he was arrested. They were all arrested quickly. The bombs were kind of ineffective and not very threatening. But they were arrested by Shishakli's government and placed in Mezze prison. But they were released quickly. And Sultan al-Atrash said, this is also a quote from Seal, "I did not ask Shishakli for the freedom of my son. I asked him for the freedom of my country." This is pretty important, I think. And the following month after that, in the middle of 1953, in the summer of 1953, Hashim al-Atassi organized a meeting in Homs of all of the political parties and all the political figures in Syria to register a petition and direct opposition to Shishakli and the Shishakli dictatorship. The archival documents are breathtaking in the amount of engagement and the principled opposition from every quarter to the idea of military rule and dictatorship from the perspective of 1953. Sultan al-Atrash and Amir Hassan al-Atrash signed this petition and visited Atassi in Homs. And Shishakli began to become more and more worried about the opposition. Now, over the coming months, they planned, the politicians who had met in Homs, they planned to challenge Shishakli in a civil society movement and to try to end this Shishakli dictatorship. But before they could do that, and before they could get those plans in action, Mansour stepped onto the stage again and went to Jabal Druze and began distributing leaflets where he called for the overthrow that were put in by the Ba'ath Party, leaflets calling for the overthrow of the Shishakli government. And so this became known to Shishakli and to the intelligence services. And they arrested him again, but they also initiated a movement of suppression against the Druze specifically. Not against the Ba'ath Party so much, but against the Druze specifically. This is why I say, what's Druze about Shishakli's reaction is what this is my argument. And Shishakli decided to strike his enemies before they struck him. And this, as a person who read deeply in the records of the Syrian revolt and the French Mandate, Shishakli attempted to arrest and invited the Druze leaders to Damascus in the same way that High Commissioner General Sarai had invited the Druze leaders in 1925 to Damascus, and then when they came there, he arrested them and held them. But at the same time, this is in February or in January, he arrested all of the political leaders of Damascus and put them on house arrest. And by doing this, Shishakli mobilized the army in opposition to him. And the army commanders, and not just Druze commanders, but army commanders in a variety of places in Syria outside Damascus, called on him to step down and mobilize their forces in opposition to the Shishakli government. And so that happened in January and February of 1954. Shishakli left and fled under the threat of a mass popular movement led by all political parties in Syria and a mutiny, or what he considered a mutiny, in the army. The point was to defend Syrian democracy, to oppose dictatorship, and to oppose military rule in a way that, like I say, is rather surprising from the perspective of the world. He also ordered, Shishakli had ordered military forces to besiege Sultan al-Tash's village, Kraya, immediately before this. Now, it's a little ironic, and especially from the current events, that Shishakli fled Damascus at 10 o'clock at night on September or February 1954, and he took refuge in the Saudi embassy. And it was clearly ironic. He spent one night, and it was a safe place apparently. And subsequently went to France and then to Brazil, where he was assassinated in 1954. So there's a number of things that occurred to me about this story, and I'm about to conclude here. There's a story of fathers and sons, of Adnan, Hashim, and the efforts of fathers to protect their sons. Hashim al-Tassi failed in his effort to protect his son from Sarraj, who sentenced him to death for political activity a few years later. His sentence was commuted by Abdel Nasser during the time of the United Arab Republic, but he never was able to go back to Syria. He died young in Beirut in exile. Mansour was able to take part in politics in the mid-60s as a member of what he called the Old Ba'ath, and in a principled way. And then he was forced into retirement, but not into exile, at least not for long, in the late 60s, because of his family connections and the fact that his father, unlike Hashim al-Tassi, was still alive and still had this aura that was important. But there's other things about the story that I think is interesting too, and that is the depth and the engagement and the principled opposition to authoritarianism that united Syrians, led by the Druze, but not only the Druze, in this period of 1953 and 1954. Mansour's daughter, French-trained professional historian Rima Al-Arash, edited and published his memoirs in 2008, a couple of years after his death in 2006, and I mean to make use of those valuable memoirs as I proceed with this project. And another thing that I think is important to note is the depth and the intensity of foreign intervention at this time of ostensible independence. The French embassy felt that the Americans and their coups behind Shishakli in 1949 would return France to influence in opposition to Britain, which I found eye-popping. The British were still around, the French were still around, the Americans had come with the CIA. Hosni Zaim's coup was definitively a CIA operation based on the French archives. and the French believed that they would return to prominence and domination of this region thanks to their friends coming from Washington.